Good morning, everyone, and welcome back again for day two of the Ohio US EPA Brownfields Grant Writing Workshop. My name is Roxanne Anderson. I'm the Region 5 Director for the Kansas State University Technical Assistance to Brownfields, or KSU TAB program. Yesterday, we covered a lot of ground. We talked about the overall grant process, what makes an application competitive, and some of the common strengths and challenges our panelists have seen through their own experiences. You also had the opportunity to put some of that information into practice during the breakout exercise by reviewing either section one or section two of the actual successful application. So today, we're going to build on that foundation and continue working through the application. Spend more time looking at how applicants can clearly connect their project approach, community needs, partnerships, and overall story. We once again have some fantastic speakers and panelists joining us, and we hope you will continue asking questions and sharing your own experiences throughout the day. And before we jump back in, I just want to cover a few housekeeping reminders for those of you who are not here yesterday. So for the technical notes, if you experience any technical difficulties during today's workshop, please use the phone number or email address shown on the screen. Someone from our team will be available to troubleshoot, likely Hannah. We are also recording today's session. The recording and workshop materials will be available through the KSU TAB website and the workshop page, as well as the resources. We'll share those links again in the chat today. I think Hannah might have already done that. So there's no need to try and capture every detail or screenshot as we go through the day. Also in the chat, if you are not familiar from yesterday with Zoom, hopefully you're at least familiar with this particular Zoom room, but just a few quick reminders. Please make sure your microphone remains muted and your camera is turned off. I think it's automatic right now, but it helps reduce the background noise and keep everything running smoothly. We also ask that your Zoom name match the name that you use when you register so we can actually verify your attendance. If you need to update it, you can click on the participants button, locate your name, select more, and then choose rename. And finally, please continue using the chat to submit questions throughout the workshop. We would prefer that questions be sent to everyone so others can benefit from the discussion as well. But if you're feeling like you want to keep it one-on-one, you're also welcome to send a question directly to a speaker if that feels more comfortable. Yesterday's questions and discussions added a lot to the workshop, so please keep them coming. There's a good chance that someone else has the same question or may have an experience that helps answer it. So please add whatever you can. So with that, let's get started with day two. And I'm going to pass it off to our host, Ohio EPA, Corin.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Corin Fogel. I am the supervisor of the Brownfield program that we have here at Ohio EPA. So as Roxanne mentioned, we are going to continue on with the application sections, talking about that. We are going to have a presentation from Richard, who is a Brownfield coordinator here with Ohio EPA. He's going to explain our program and what we can offer through our targeted Brownfield assessment program. We're also going to hear from Beth Grigsby, who is the KSU TAB Assistant Director for Region 5. And then our panel presentation this morning is going to be a discussion about sections 3 and 4 of the grant narrative. So the main presenters will be Roxanne and then also Amy Yursevich, who is a KSU TAB partner. During that presentation, we will hear from a few panelists. They will be jumping in when they feel like they have relevant information to share. Those panelists include Sally Gladwell, who is a senior vice president and senior principal at Manick and Smith Group and a certified professional with Ohio EPA. We also have Crystal Lorimore, who is the executive director of the Community Improvement Corporation of Belmont County. And we also have Dan Joker, who is our lead Brownfield coordinator here at Ohio EPA, with a ton of experience in the program. And then our final panelist is Vince Adamus, who is an environmental project manager at Cuyahoga County Land Bank. So they will be interjecting in the presentation, as I mentioned earlier. And then we will take a break. And then after the break, we will be doing a presentation from Amy Ursovich about writing a strong proposal. And then, as we did yesterday, we will have a group breakout session exercise to go over and score based on sections 3 and 4. So we'll be looking at a real application that was submitted and using what we've learned to score that. And then we will adjourn. So yeah, so we're in for a great morning. And those are the pictures of the panelists, as I mentioned. A lot of great experience, many years working in the brownfield programs throughout the state. So very exciting. We're really looking forward to the panel presentation. But up first, I believe, is Richard, who will be presenting, as I mentioned, on Ohio EPA's brownfield program.
So before we jump in, I'm just going to review what KSU tab is, just for those of you who weren't here yesterday or are not familiar. Um, and so that you kind of understand why we're here and how we fit into the larger Brownfields Technical Assistance Network. So EPA funds technical assistance to brownfields, or TAB, providers across the country. As you can see on this map, the United States is divided into several TAB regions with different organizations providing support in each area. Kansas State University serves as the TAB provider for EPA regions 5, 6, 7, and 8. I specifically work with Beth in Region 5, which includes Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. Our role is to provide free technical assistance to communities, tribes, nonprofits, and other eligible organizations working throughout Brownfield's challenges. That assistance can include grant application support, project planning, brownfield inventories, community engagement, redevelopment strategies, training, and just helping connecting communities with additional resources and partners. The most important thing to remember is that tab assistance is free, and communities don't need to already have an EPA grant to work with us. So whether you're just beginning to identify potential brownfield sites or already managing a complex redevelopment project, there's a tab provider available to help assist you with that. We also want to hear your feedback by the end of our workshop. This helps us kind of understand where we can improve, where we can answer questions that we haven't, and how to better serve you as we move forward doing more workshops and webinars. So please keep this on hand. And if you have to bow out at any point in time during the middle of the session, if we could still get your feedback, that would be great. Otherwise, you can do this at the end of the day today. So with that, I will hand this off to Richard Murray.
Thank you, Roxanne. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day two. Again, I am Richard Murray with Ohio EPA's Brownfields program as a project coordinator. Yesterday, we've covered the fundamental elements of a grant application, and today I want to shift and focus on the opportunities that you can stack onto your potential redevelopment on your property to make your application even stronger and possibly leverage additional funds. So before I dive into opportunities available to y'all in Ohio, I kind of want to set the stage on how competitive these national grant opportunities are. This is a preliminary draft of the TA review of applications per state. And as you see from left to right, Ohio had a total of 8, 4 winning, 4 did not. Minnesota, 2 applied, 1 got or 2 got TA, and 1 winning, 1 did not. Uh, Basically, I wanted to showcase this is that being that TA is more of a critical diagnostic review versus a guaranteed ticket, being that this is a national stage and it's super competitive. But y'all even being in attendance today puts you one step closer and it helps tighten your narrative, catch errors, and help leverage for additional resources down your road. So, planning for success. Success starts long before you submit your application. You really need to conduct your planning as soon as possible. To succeed, I come up with the 3 key things. First, champion, having a local champion to push your vision forward. We actually have a great panelist, Crystal, who is a perfect example of a champion for her local community. So if you ever get a chance, pick her brain to ask her advice and how to actually advocate for community members. Second, if possible, secure a planner or dedicate someone who can manage the logistics, acres, and whatever is required for that grant. And then third, aggressively push community engagement. We talked about a little bit yesterday within our grant review of how important it is to have tangible community engagement instead of these passive interactions like a Facebook post and such. So those are the three things that you should definitely keep in mind as you're planning for future applications. So prior to all that, you must correctly identify your site to get funding, because depending on where you're going, you have to know like, oh, this is a brownfield. And simply put, a brownfield is a property that is complicated by actual or perceived contamination. Usually, these sites have low to moderate levels of contamination, which can include things from petroleum, asbestos, or lead-based paint. Keep in mind, no single-family homes are eligible, but apartments with four or more units do qualify. And as you can see on this list, this is not a all-inclusive, but you can see it is still a pretty big list. A brownfield can hide in plain sight. They aren't just massive abandoned factories. In your community, they can look like an outdated mall, a former gas station, or a vacant dry cleaner. And so identifying these everyday sites is also a critical step to your revitalization of your properties or area. So now getting into more of the fun stuff. If you need technical assistance or assessments, you should definitely come to Ohio EPA's TBA program, Targeted Brownfield Assessments, for our free assessment services or technical assistance. It's non-competitive. It's rolling funds, really easy application. It's online, and if there is any questions or concern, even when you're going through this application form online, you can always give us a call or email us, and we're more than happy to help. So once you have a potential site, you have identified it, you're starting to plan, and you're coming to us, you have a question about eligibility. Once you see that site, the property needs to be, or your application, it needs to be a local government or nonprofit entity to qualify for our TBA services. The main restriction is that the site cannot be on CERCLA or national priority list. And again, going back to it needs to be a brownfield. So not a single family home, but it can be an apartment with four or more units. And ownership and access, a little bit of what happened yesterday as well. So you really just need to make sure getting planning, right? So having access to the property. Good news here is that for our technical services, you do not need to own the property to apply for the assessment. Foreclosed, forfeited properties are fully eligible. However, we within the online application, there is a access agreement. So the current property owner needs to sign that form within your application upon submittal to then actually receive those assessment services. And now these next few slides are going to be some of the examples of services we provide. And this is I would say, the bread and butter of our technical services that we provide. Phase one assessment, this is recommended, like even if you don't even know if this is a brownfield and you're going through your property, like phase one is always a good first step. This is a paper exercise, a historical records review and investigation, and then our contractor will go out to take photos and do a designation of wrecks or identify areas and doing a whole very professional report to then provide to y'all to give a designation of either further investigations or if your property is clear of wrecks or IAs. So after the phase one, if the phase one does flag a identified area or a wreck, we recommend proceeding with a phase two assessment. And this is where we actually take direct samples of those contaminants of concern within those wrecks or IAs. And these are ASTM and VAP compliant as well. You can request a VAP compliant phase two assessment. We'll just have internal conversations and a phone call with y'all, depending on where you want your project to proceed or your end use goals. Typically, we do a limited phase two assessment. But again, if there's any questions about assessment services that we offer and what you need for your property, we can always tailor and have those conversations via phone. Another one that's popular, especially with ODOD, asbestos surveys. If your project involves demolition, an asbestos survey is mandatory, must be conducted by a licensed inspector, and this establishes your baseline and serves as your pre-demolition survey. Okay, so circling back to the very first slide, or first two slides, planning is very important. So it's establishing general timeframes. If you call us prior to your application, we can have conversations about when you would like these done. But these are the generic timelines that we have for our phase one, phase two, remedial action plans and such. Um, and if you have a due date, we can obviously try to do our best to accommodate for your timelines, but these are the typical time frames for these reports. And also, you don't have to write any of this down. Like Roxanne said, this is all recorded. And so what else does Ohio Brownfields offer? Free TA, strategized planning, brownfield inventories, or if you need technical review and such, you can go through our program and apply for VAP TA as well. Any discussions or questions needed for next step for your project, we're here to collaborate and help. So once you secure possible TBA funding for your phase one, phase two, there's also ways you can leverage that funding into other programs. One that's very popular, I know they just closed out or announced grant awardees. The Department of Development offers building demolition and site revitalization program. Just this past April, $7.3 million was awarded to help 32 counties with demolition. They also offered the brownfield remediation program. In May, 61 million was announced for projects across 75 counties. And please note the applications are currently closed, but keep an eye out for future updates. But always planning ahead, getting things lined up for those announcements so you're not scrambling to catch up. Jobs Ohio offers a revitalization program to design accelerant redevelopment. They offer two phase two assessment grants up to $200,000 on a reimbursement basis. For actual redevelopment, they provide revitalization loans, typically ranging from 500,000 to 5 million. And they also offer revitalization grants up to $1 million, which are usually coupled with their loans. If you represent a municipality with a population over 75,000, you should also look into Vibrant Community Program. Your community must have a poverty rate at above or higher state average to qualify. The focus is to regenerate investment in distressed downtowns or commercial districts. Funding doesn't exceed $1 million per project and is limited to 50% eligible costs. Our next program, Ohio Water Development Authority, is another great resource. They offer an on-site stormwater loan program with a maximum of $5 million. To be eligible, it needs to be a local government agency. You must own the property. And these funding cover the construction of on-site stormwater controls, such as permeable pavers or green roofs, an example there. And that contact is Dan. He's your go-to, but you can grab this in the resources and recording. Don't overlook other regional or federal resources. The Great Lakes Community Action Partnership provides technical assistance for drinking water, wastewater, or infrastructure. HUD offers the Community Development Block Grant Program for urban communities, and Appalachian Regional Commission also provides grants for self-sustaining economic development in the area. So I went over a lot and I went through it relatively fast, but please stay informed. Please scan the QR code. We have a listserv, and we push updates. Shelby is head of that, and she's always has her finger to the pulse for any grant opportunities and things that would be beneficial for our community members. But if you have any environmental challenges or any frequently asked questions, you can always come to us, give us a phone call or email. And I appreciate you guys' time and being in attendance. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat for everyone so we can see. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. With that, I am going to hand it off for helpful hints and resources. You guys are lucky. You get to have Beth Grigsby, who has been in this field for a very long time, with so much experience. Um, and I'm excited to hand this off to her.
Thank you, Roxanne. And Richard, that was a great presentation. Ohio is so lucky to have the resources it has for brownfields redevelopment. So I think, I love working in Ohio and I love working with the Ohio EPA. So, okay, what have I done in my life? Just who I am. I'm a geologist and I have over 30 years experience with brownfields redevelopment. I worked for the city of Indianapolis for 9 years, and that's where I was introduced to the Brownfields program because we were actually living it. The tax delinquent properties in the city, they just go in the black hole of properties. Couldn't do anything with them. Back then, you didn't have a lot of the changes for the Brownfields legislation and that type of thing that really helped move things along, but it was an interesting time. I also worked for a community development corporation for 2 years, and I worked as a consultant for about 15 years, and that's too long to work as a consultant. But anyway, I love my work because I worked with communities all over the place and helped them with drafting their grants, but also helping them implement the program. And with the TAB program for probably I'd say 6 years. I total because I was the Region 5 coordinator back in 2002, and now I'm back with the Kansas State University TED program, which I love. So let's get moving. Enough about me. So I want to give you some helpful hints. And just a lot of this might be reiteration. It's just a reminder. But I just want you to, everything I'm providing today will be an overview. So I really encourage you to dig into some of the websites that I'll be talking about. But let's talk about helpful hint number one. Make sure you meet threshold criteria. Find out if you're eligible, and if you're a local government, you are eligible. But is your project, are your sites eligible? And that's something a lot of times I really think you could reach out to Ohio EPA for eligibility, but you also go directly to EPA, ask questions. This is important, and they will answer questions all the way through the NOFO time period. They will do that, but it's better if you ask now, because why spend so much time working on your grant if you're not really even eligible? Helpful hint number two. This is specific to cleanup grants and threshold. Now, I have a statistic here about 20% of cleanup grants. That's really from funding year 25. I haven't really done the math on this year's in terms of failed threshold. But here are some tips that EPA provided to us about why. And some are just simply it didn't respond to the criteria. You had information missing from the response. You didn't establish your bona fide prospective purchaser liability protection requirements. It's really spelled out kind of clearly in the guidelines, but you can also, this is another one where you could probably check in with Ohio EPA or the EPA. You're ineligible, or maybe you didn't meet the community notification requirement that you need in the cleanup grants. So that these are just simple things. Or you applied for a cleanup grant, but you didn't even own the site. Or you didn't get your state or tribal site characterization letter. That's definitely an Ohio EPA responsibility for you to reach out to them and make sure that you're getting your letter done in time. Okay, we'll go helpful hint number 3. Be excited about your project. Let the Ohio EPA and the EPA know how excited you are about this project. Establish the relationships early, and I'm telling you, I'd love to see Dan's face if a community came in and showed this kind of enthusiasm. They would remember, Ohio EPA would remember your project for a long time, I'm sure, and probably be an advocate. So that's another thing. Reach out to Ohio EPA. They're helpful with priority sites. Maybe they have some intel about the sites that would help your grant. They have a lot of information, I'm sure, about your target area. That will help your grant. That strengthens your grant to have that information. Helpful hint number 4. Okay. Many communities do work with consultants who draft their grants. I was a consultant once. I understand, but I also understood from a grantee side from working with the city of Indianapolis that you really need possibly some programmatic type of funding to get you through the entire term. So remember not to put straight zeros across unless you're really a pretty, you really have the staff and you really have that capacity. But programmatic are going to be costs that aren't the 5% administration limit. So you don't have that for programmatic. And think about what you're doing. You'll be planning community engagement. You're going to need time to identify and prioritize your sites. Site access agreements are important. Discussions with your property owners are important. Oversight of contractor activities. You really need to oversee contractors on your site. Pop in if you're able to and see what's going on. See how safe they are and make sure things are going well. And also, it's a great learning experience for you if you've not been exposed to this type of work. Find out what they do and how they do it. But you'll also be coordinating project planning. There's so many things that you will be doing that you should allow yourself some programmatic funds. Helpful hint number 5. Check out the frequently asked questions about multi-purpose assessment, RLF, and cleanup grants. I'm putting a link here. Hopefully it works. But multiple topics, really important. It starts off with changes to the guidelines, goes over consultant services, what you can do, what you can't do, goes over procurement, how you use grant funds. I mean, there's specific activities you can do with an assessment grant. There's specific activities you can do with a cleanup grant. Good to know these things. Is your site eligible? What entails administrative cost? Petroleum brownfield sites, that type of thing. Facts for each type of grant. Whoops, I skipped and I don't want to. So here are this is sort of some that I pulled up that I felt like were really very useful. And I'm going to switch to my notes because I need some help sometimes here. But one thing I notice under the general information, if you look for the purposes of community need criterion, what are examples of health, welfare, and environmental? Well, they give you that type of information in the facts. I mean, things like they list things like asthma rates among children, teen pregnancy rate, number of vulnerable inhabitants in the target area, um, whether or not your target area is disproportionately impacted by brownfields, environmental issues associated with brownfields. And that's an important thing that you can also get out of Ohio EPA. That's information that's very helpful. Vandalism, crime rate, those are health, welfare, and environmental. When you get into socioeconomic, you get into the impacts of the brownfields, such as low property values, low tax base, percentage of the community unemployed, and it goes on and on. I mean, really very helpful information. And what can I use? Can I use grant funds for demolition activities? Well, I gave you the link, but it'd be interesting to see what people say. And I'm posing that I'd like you to respond. What do you think? Can you use grant funds to cover demolition? So now we'll go to a tool that's near and dear to my heart. Started working on this back in 2002 with Purdue University. I was a TAB regional coordinator for the area. And all the why we developed this was I couldn't believe that when you read the guidelines, now when I read the guidelines, sure, they make sense. I've been doing this for years and years. But if you're new to that, that's quite a bit to take in. And what I noticed was, okay, you're compliant with CFR, whatever, whatever. Well, it's nice to have something like Tab Easy that really will send you to that CFR code so that you can read it and not have to search for it. Tab Easy is also for folks that like to work through the grant anytime they want to work on the grant. So you can work on it day or night. This information is yours. This information is not, we can't access that information. It's private unless you share it. So we'll talk about that here now. So the way you get there is you go to our ksutab.org website. You select eTools. When you select eTools, that'll take you to different eTools. You'll select Tab Easy. And then you come up with, you'll eventually get to this page, Tab Easy, where this is the resource page. It's great. Quick links to the MARC grant, guidelines, the facts, submission checklist, the Brownfields grant research links, which is something I'll talk about here in the next slide, sample grant applications. I know it's really useful for me to see an example of how another community handled criteria that is the community similar to my own. So how did they handle it? How did they outline it? Maybe they're in my state. How did they handle the budget? How did they handle leveraging resources if they're in my state? That's a great reason to take a look. Sometimes they have ideas that you don't come across until it's triggered. You do not have to sign in to view our resources. But if you want to use a tool, and we'll go through this in a minute, you do have to log in. Very simple login. We don't use your information for anything other than maybe informing you about events and webinars and educational types for brownfields. But it's a safe website. It's been around for years. So, but we've done a lot of great improvements. I'm really proud of what we've done this past year. So if you visited a few years back, try again, see what you think, and let me know if you have any issues with it. I'd really like to know so we can get those things fixed. So I mentioned some of the valuable, I wanted to show you a couple of the areas that I think you should try to visit. And the Brownfields Grant Research links, we developed this piece last year. Some great minds within KSU TAB were a big part of it. Oh, and Amy's included in that. Thank you, Amy. Um, but they go over different pieces that are important to your grant application, like demographic information, sources, health and welfare, environmental information for targeted area and priority sites. We list the public environmental data partners along with others. So this is information that we think may be helpful to you. We also well, I'll keep going here. We'll just keep going. Sorry, fumble. Um, I wanted to show you two of the sites, but there are many sites on that guide, on the research links that I think you should explore. One is for health and welfare of the community section. You need to, if you haven't already, check out CDC Places. It's been mentioned earlier, yesterday, as an important tool. It provides interactive maps of 40 chronic diseases and health-related measures at the levels of county, place, census tract, and zip code. So it's really a great tool to use. I'm going to show you a slide. It's relatively easy to get in. Once you go to CDC Places, I selected the Interactive Places map to get where you're at here. And in this particular incident, I used Youngstown, Ohio. So that was what I used. And if you look across the green part, the green bar at the top, and you may not be able to read it here, but you can see it on your slides if you go back. But things like health outcomes, categories health and health risk behaviors, disability, those are categories. So for this particular map, I chose health outcomes, which is on the green bar at the top. And then you get this light gray bar of chronic diseases that you might want to check out. I checked out asthma in this case. So go to the next slide. And this is a smaller version of that map, but I wanted to show you what the pop-up was. I selected on this particular map a census tract, and I want to find out about asthma. So you get a small pop-up here that gives you some data. On the second part of this pop-up, it said that I had roughly 11.7% of the adults in the area were estimated to have asthma in 2023. Well, this is a great tool for you to use when you're talking about your targeted area. So then I looked in the pop-up, and on that second page of it, it had the census data. I thought, oh, well, okay, what's that about? So I went to census data, and that was very interesting too. I can't even read my own slide, but I selected, it had different variations on a thing. So what I selected here was housing. You could do demographics, you could do other categories, but I thought, okay, maybe maybe I'm redeveloping the site as a residential. And it was interesting what I found on this particular census tract and information and the census data was that there were 1,472 occupied housing units and 166 vacant housing units. So a total of 1,638 housing units. Roughly 10% of those units were vacant. And what you might do then is go back and forth with, okay, compare to the county, or maybe and maybe you compare it to the broader community. Youngstown, maybe you compare it to that. But what do those numbers look like in your target area? So that's an example. I hope you could play with it and have fun with it, and let me know if you have any issues. So the next slide here. I'm going to talk about another link that I found that I believe you would appreciate in the Brownfields Grant research links that you found. Now, let's go back to why we're here. The Brownfields Grant research links can be found on that Tab Easy website screen. So just so you know. And this is, we talked to the EPA about this particular site. This is actually the EJ screen, but it was taken over by the Public Environmental Data Partner Screening Tool. And is that a resource we can use or not a resource we can use? Well, they didn't really want to make a call on it, but they did say if you have an original source of data and you cite the original source, you don't exactly cite the screen, you cite the source, then you can use that information. So it's a wonderful tool. I hope you get a chance to use it. I'm going to show you a little bit of what I did with it here. And then here, Youngstown again. This time when I went into Youngstown, then I selected, if you look at the icons on the left side of the screen, you'll see something looks like a notepad or something. I selected reports is what that is. And under reports, I select an area and I selected a block group. So a block group is a smaller part of your census tract. That's a good one to take a look at. So that's what I received there. Go to the next screen here. And when you select that area, you just sort of toggle it a little bit or select it. You can come up with, you can get EJ reports, community reports. So I selected that. And it's amazing the kind of data you can get. It's just amazing. They've actually, it seems like they've added a few bells and whistles to how they compile the data in this, but it's very useful. And I wish you could see some of this because I'm even struggling seeing it. But if you see something that is, let's say, a percentile, let's say you're at a 93 percentile in the state, that means that 93% of the communities are at a lower rate than you are. So it's a very high rate percentile in the state. You can do percentile in the USA, but it's very easy to use. So if you're higher than 98, you're higher than 98% or 93%, whatever you see the percentile to be, that's interesting information to share. And you have the sources to back it up. So this is another piece of what they've added, additional information, very, very useful. I think you should take a look at it. Climate, critical services, you know, a type of demographics, the language spoken, great resource for you to use. This is a duplicate slide, so sorry about that. And now we'll get on with Tab Easy. So once you're into Tab Easy, the first thing you'll do, and there's a tutorial, but if you struggle with this, let me know. Like I said, it's a great tool. Even as a grant writer, I was using Tab Easy, mainly because you get a template of the grant application itself. It's great. And then also I thought it was great because of the tips and the references that are very useful. So once you create a new application, you'll receive a pop-up. You choose a title for your grant, the type of grant application you want to write, and you can then add users if you wish, other people that you want to share the application with that they can write as well. So that's that piece. Then setting up the grant application. Once you've created your grant, You use the navigation bar. If you look to the left here, you're going to see that you have the application information sheet. You have the narrative criteria, which we've been working on the different breakout sessions. Threshold criteria. You have a tab review where you can request a tab review. You also have helpful hints. And this is all just basically right in front of you that you can toggle through. And just remember, you always save if you put anything in. This is configuration. Once you're complete with the configuration, you'll have then the template that you'll want to use for your grant. In this particular case, it's asking for requested funding. Just, you go through, answer the questions. It's very user-friendly. And then you follow the prompts in the menu. So in this case, I selected narrative criteria. I selected a target area, and you follow the outline on the left side of the page. Each time you select a section, Tab Easy will provide the narrative criteria set by the EPA for that specific section. It will also give you evaluation criteria. That's a great thing to have, not just the criteria you respond to, but how are they going to evaluate it? And then helpful hints for a specific section. And this is a kind of a demonstration of what you'll find. So when you hit the drop down for helpful hints, you'll see different information here. A lot of it could be links that you use, could be referencing facts that you might look at. So lots of different information when you're looking at helpful hints. And by the way, you can print off the helpful hints if you want beforehand, if that's the way you like to work, and then that way you have all of it together and just however you want to use it. Very flexible tool. And here, be sure to save your work. And I do that all the time where I forget to save. Please save. And then once you mark a section as complete, the menu on the left side will also then be updated. How do you export to Word? This shows you just go up to, here we go, up above, three-dot icon, select Export to Word. The document will automatically download. A lot of times what I've done in the past is just download the outline of the grant, the narrative criteria, or outline it all. It's always a good idea to compare your complete grant exported from tab to the grant guidelines just to make sure you haven't missed a section. And so you get that document where you can put your letterhead on it, you can format it. So it's again, very easy, simple, and friendly. So this next NOFO, request a review of your funding year 27 grant. Really do have some great people that will assist us with not just the tab folks who are experts at this, but also we have former EPA project officers that are assisting us. One that you may know, hopefully she'll be doing this next year, Carla Acker, has joined our team, and we're really excited about that. We also have Amy does review of grants. So there's a really good team of folks that work on these and provide comments and thoughts. It's just like another set of eyes that doesn't know your community necessarily that can help you through. And you need additional help? Well, there's 3 of us in Region 5. Kristen Persosky, she really focuses mainly on Minnesota. There's me and Roxanne. So here's our contact information. And be calm. Chaos is just collaboration in disguise. And I'll pass it over for the panel discussion to Roxanne and Amy from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beth. That was amazing. Tons of good information there. And please make sure to visit this after the fact with the recording and the PowerPoint slides if you want to reference any of this, because it's going to be really useful as you guys go through it. So we're going to start with the panel discussion, and our panelists are going to hop in whenever they find something that they want to touch base on. It is going to be, I'm going to go over section 3, which is often the most technical section of the application, and honestly one of the sections that can separate an average application from a highly competitive one. Up to this point, in your application and narrative, theoretically, you've convinced the EPA that your community has a need that you have a good project, but now you have to convince them that you know exactly how you're going to carry that project out. So think of this section as your project management plan, and you're the project manager. The EPA wants to know, what are you going to do? When are you going to do it? Who's responsible? What will you produce? How much is it going to cost? How will you know if you're succeeding? The better organized and more realistic your responses are, the more confidence reviewers will have that you're going to be able to successfully manage the grant. So I want to point something out before we dive into the details. We saw this yesterday, but I want you to notice how many points rather this section is worth. The community-wide assessment and assessment coalition grants, it's 45 points. For cleanups, it's 55 points. That means that this section is worth almost 1/3 of the entire application. Applicants sometimes spend weeks polishing the community needs section and then rush through the tasks and cost estimate side. Don't do that. EPA wants to see that you've thought through implementation just as carefully as you've thought through why you need that grant. So I think the easiest way to approach every task is to ask yourself 4 questions. What are we doing? So describe the EPA funded activities. If someone else is contributing resources, whether that's like staff time, local funding, or other grants, you can identify those as well. When are we doing it? Give EPA an anticipated schedule with logical milestones. Who is responsible? Usually that's the applicant. If someone else is leading a technical activity, you need to explain why they're the appropriate lead while making it clear the applicant still retains oversight. It's very important. And finally, what will we produce? Those are your outputs. Notice I don't say what will we accomplish. Outputs are the work products, such as phase 1 ESAs, cleanup plans, community meetings, quarterly reports. Those are measurable things you produce during the grant. So this slide gives you examples of common eligible tasks, but don't think of it necessarily as a checklist. Your tasks should really reflect your project, not someone else's. Project management is almost always in there, and assessment work is common for assessment and multipurpose grants. Cleanup tasks obviously become much more significant under cleanup and multipurpose grants. But one thing I want to point out here is the distinction between programmatic costs and administrative costs. People often assume all project management counts toward the 5% administrative gap or cap, but it doesn't. Financial reporting and performance reporting are considered allowable programmatic costs and aren't subject to that limitation. You can also notice here that the health monitoring language. Local governments may use up to 10% of grant funds for eligible health monitoring activities, but there are specific requirements attached to that, including coordination with your local health agency. So always check the guidelines before assuming a task is actually eligible for something. This slide is mostly just for cleanup grants, but it's an important lesson for everyone. One of the most common components EPA gave during debriefings last year was the applicant referred us to the ABCA. That's not enough. Your narrative needs to briefly describe the cleanup itself. So you need to tell them, what media are you actually cleaning up? What cleanup methods are you actually proposing? What and how will materials be handled or disposed of. The reviewer should understand your cleanup approach without opening any other documents. And remember, the better your phase two investigation is before you apply, the stronger and more realistic your cleanup plan will be. I just want to pause here for a second and make sure that I don't have any comments from any of the panelists and make sure I'm leaving space for them. If you guys want to speak, please just hop in.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in a little bit on that previous slide, the last bullet you had about ensuring your phase two is complete. This kind of builds on what Shelby brought up yesterday, because there's a state support letter that goes with it. It's a threshold with the application. And so if you have a cleanup grant in particular, we will review all your reports that you've generated to support your remedy. So the phase one, phase two, maybe an asbestos survey. So we'll do that evaluation because US EPA wants to know if we've determined that there's a sufficient level of site characterization for work to begin. And so we need to include that in our support letter. There were a few last year that were not ready. They needed some more assessment, and that's okay because they add a statement in the letter indicating that the applicant will continue some assessment until award. And that's usually, around May, June timeframe to get the assessment complete. And then on another relevant note too is in some of the cleanup applications and cleanup projects that are awarded and touching on Richard's presentation this morning, our TBA program has assisted cleanup projects as they're going through implementation. Sometimes additional assessment needs may be needed. And since it's not an eligible activity for a cleanup grant, we've used some of our TBA funding to do that additional assessment. It's often related to groundwater or vapor migration that may be migrating from a site. So just to get some extra data to help with the cleanup documentation at the end. So I just wanted to touch on those two issues.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to project implementation. So this is where you describe your work. The one thing I want to emphasize is that the EPA now wants applicants to clearly distinguish between activities the EPA grant is paying for and activities or resources being contributed from somewhere else. So if your city is providing staff time, if another grant is funding demolition, if your economic development organization is paying for reuse planning, you need to make sure you say that. But don't duplicate information you've already listed under leveraging resources. Another recommendation, keep your tasks logical. Sometimes applicants try to create 8 or 10 tiny tasks. That usually makes the application a little harder to follow. Um, Group related activities together and make the sequence easy to understand so that the reviewer can follow easier and is not trying to sift through all of your information. So this is probably the easiest place for reviewers to identify unrealistic projects. So here I want you to think about the sequence. You can't conduct a phase two before you've completed a phase one. You can't begin intrusive sampling before your QAPP is approved. You shouldn't be writing cleanup plans before you've characterized contamination. So make sure your schedule actually reflects how projects happen in real life. And don't forget ongoing activities, your quarterly reporting, your financial management, community engagement. Those aren't one-time events. They continue throughout the project period. So I know there's a lot on this slide. Don't feel like you need to read it all now. But I really like using examples like this because they show what EPA means by a logical implementation plan. So notice how every activity builds on the previous one. You've got first site access, then eligibility, then phase one, then the QAPP, then phase two, then cleanup planning. Nothing happens out of order. Also notice we're not just telling EPA what we're doing. We're telling them when, who's responsible, and what outputs we're going to produce. And that's exactly the structure reviewers are looking for, and it's exactly the structure that makes it easier for them to follow. Remember, reviewers are not necessarily familiar with this process. They don't necessarily know what all of this means. They're following the guidelines and making sure what's in the guidelines is also in your application. So now we get into everyone's favorite topic, which is budgets. The biggest mistake applicants make is thinking EPA just wants a number. So the EPA wants to understand how you actually arrive at that number. So you need to show your math, um, hour times, hourly rate, quantity times, unit cost. Explain where your estimates come from. Current consultant proposals, previous projects, local salary schedules, market rates. Don't just change EPA budget categories. Please use the categories exactly as they're provided. Um, One of the updates that was for FY26 was that conference registration now belongs under other, while airfare, hotel meals, and transportation belong under travel. And those details matter. So it's really important for you to pay attention to, especially if you've written guideline or applications before, pay attention to any of the specific guidelines that have changed from one year to another, because those little details are going to be what the reviewers are looking at because they're not looking at previous years. So if you miss something like that and put something under the wrong category or change a category, it can be a little confusing to the reviewer.
Roxanne, can you hear
Yes,
me okay?
yes,
One
please.
of the things we've done in that budget calculation is we usually toss in a value of our staff time that are in terms of contributing to the management for the project, but we don't charge it back to the grant, but we throw it in there anyway, just to give the reviewers an idea of organizational time and value added. We have direct costs. We can add them in, you know, if we have to go to a conference or something specifically related, that kind of thing. But in general, we often add in our staff costs for managing project. But our organization, we do it as in kind, and we're very clear about that in the application. So we're not charging back to the grant.
Awesome. Thanks for adding that. So one of the biggest changes last year, and honestly, one of the areas that caused the most confusion was, is it contractual or is it construction? So the question isn't simply, is this construction? Instead, EP asks, what is the principal purpose of the contract? If 50% or more of the contract is for remediation or construction activities, then it belongs under construction. If the primary purpose of environmental consulting, assessments, planning, or oversight, then usually it belongs under contractual. Assessment grants generally remain under contractual. Cleanup grants often include construction. Um, and for the purpose of the application that we're reviewing, you're going to be looking at multi-purpose, which is going to have a little bit of both. If you're unsure, you can ask your EPA project officer before you submit your application. They can answer clarifying questions like that. It's much easier to classify costs correctly now than to revise your budget later if you're awarded the grant. So this is what EPA means when they say, show us how you developed your cost estimates. Again, I know there's a lot on here, but I wanted some clear examples that kind of went through everything. Notice we don't say phase one ESAs, $40,000. Instead, it's explained 10 phase one ESAs times $4,000 each equals $40,000. The same approach is used throughout the entire budget. It's broken down. This tells reviewers they aren't random numbers, they're estimates based on actual work. And the more transparent you are in this process, the more confidence reviewers have that your budget is actually realistic and it's believable. So this criterion is about much more than quarterly reporting. EPA wants to know how you're going to manage your project. Again, when you're writing this section, you should really think of yourself as the project manager. One distinction I always like to make is between outputs and outcomes. Outputs are things you produce, like the phase one ESAs, community meetings, cleanup plans. Outcomes are what changes because of that work. Sites become ready for reuse. Investment is leveraged. Jobs are created. Exposure is reduced. EPA wants to see that you're measuring both of those things and that they're clearly defined separately. So let's look at how all those pieces kind of come together. The first paragraph in this is really about project management. Notice the highlighted language. We have milestones, outputs, outcomes, quarterly reviews, budget tracking, and acres reporting. The second paragraph then focuses on outputs. These are the measurable things the grant produces: site access agreements, phase one and phase two ESAs, cleanup plans, community meetings. Then the third paragraph kind of shifts to your outcomes. Those are the broader changes we're hoping to achieve when writing this piece of your application. Acres ready for reuse, investment that's leveraged, jobs, housing, redevelopment opportunities. And then finally, moving on to the last paragraph, projects don't always go exactly as planned. We all know that. And EPA understands that. So what they're looking for is a process. How will you identify those delays? Who reviews them? How will you make any adjustments that are needed? How will you communicate those changes to the EPA? Having a thoughtful corrective action process shows reviewers that you've prepared to manage the unexpected, that you're an experienced project manager who knows how to handle this, and this project will move on successfully. So with that, I'm wrapping up section 3. Remember that section wasn't just about a schedule or building a budget. It's about giving EPA confidence that your project's realistic, well-planned, financially sound, and ready to implement. So if reviewers finish this section thinking, these folks know exactly what they're going to do, how much it will cost, who's responsible, how they'll keep it on track, then you've done your job. The stronger this section is, the more confident EPA has that your community can successfully manage the grant from beginning to end. And then moving on into past performance, this is showing them that you've done it before. So it's proving that what you've provided to them has actually been done. And so with that, I want to make sure that no panelists want to make any final comments on this section, and I can also transition it to Amy.
Roxanne,
Yes.
could you go back just a few slides? I thought there was a really important point on the cost estimate, providing the individualized cost estimates or line items for, yeah, right there.
Okay.
One thing that I love that you highlighted on this slide is in the bottom right-hand corner on that estimated cost, being able to back up why you based your, why you have a per phase one cost of 4,000. That stating that that's based on, experience, industry standard, whatever it might be. I think those assumptions emphasize the reliability of the information that you're sharing and probably go a long way with reviewers. I've not been a reviewer, but I think that those assumptions are important to include.
Thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of the time we assume that reviewers know what all of this is and they're familiar with this, but just like you have to remember that a lot of the reviewers are not necessarily in the brownfields world sometimes, and so they're reviewing this from a fresh point of view. So you need to be very explicit in how you explain things for them.
And like you said before, it just builds confidence that what is there is legitimate and has been tried and tested.
Perfect. Yes.
Thank you, Roxanne. And I'm going to talk about the last section of the narrative for the grant proposal or grant application, past performance, but also want to talk a little bit about the how you're going to manage that grant, because that's also contained in section 4. Now, Roxanne showed the slide that I think I put up yesterday with the point values, talking about section 3 points and section 4 points. And if you look at that, you'll notice kind of like community involvement and community need, the point values are a little less but they're still substantial. There are 35 points for the assessments, both community-wide and coalition, and 30 for cleanup. Here we go. So we're near the end. It's a little bit less points, but don't treat this as a downhill slide to the finish. Treat it as you would a resume. I can't emphasize that enough. You do really want to put your best foot forward here when you're talking about the people that have a regular and will have a regular involvement or a day-to-day involvement in this actual grant project, those from your team, and who they are, what their experience is, what their background is, and how they can do this well, just like in a resume. It's really important, to highlight all your credentials and your relevant experience, and the experience of your organization. There's some at the end, you talk about actual experience with grants, and I'll go into that in more detail, but having that type of experience is what's going to look good to those reviewers and help you get the maximum number of points.
Amy, can I make a quick comment?
Absolutely.
I love the resume description. I've done a lot of overviews over the years of job applicants and some grant and other applications. And there's always a pile I make of the applications that come in or the resumes that come in that I look at and I say, did they even read the job description? Or did they even read the program description? So the more relevant you can make the entire application to the program, the better. This is a really there's not a lot of points. I get the sense. How's that? There's not a lot of points differentiating the successful applications from the non-successful ones. So every point counts, and every piece you go through, ask yourself, is this getting specifically to what they're asking about in their description, in their requests? So just note about that.
Thanks, Vince. That is an excellent comment. And I agree with you with applications. You sit there with a file sometimes, and I have done that in the past, and ones that you put, well, they didn't read this, or this looks really good. So you want to make sure you get in that good pile to start out with and make a good impression. The other thing mentioned on the slide before I move on is you do want to let throughout this section, EPA know, the reviewers know one of their biggest concerns, and that is, can you actually get this grant project done within the time frame, whether it's 5 years for a multi-purpose, which aren't being offered this year, or 4 years for assessment. They want to make sure that you know how to do this. There have been problems in the past where communities haven't been able to do that. As a result, I think they've come out with these coalition grants to kind of help along non-lead members that are part of the project. But also, this is where you really want to demonstrate that you can do this within the grant period. The programmatic capability, and again, is your organization capable of managing this grant? As I mentioned, the EPA does want to know that you are able to manage this grant within its time period. You want to demonstrate that your organization has the capacity. Even if you haven't done an EPA grant before, chances are you have, whether you're a nonprofit or a community, you've managed other grants. Talk about that, bring out highlights, those sorts of things. Talk about yourself, make yourself shine, as I mentioned. Your organizational structure, do you have everybody there that you need? We'll talk about that in just a minute. And your description of key staff. Again, there's where your resume comes in. Make sure that you really highlight what they're good at, what their experience is, and how it relates to a grant and what their background is. Any comments from our speaker or our panel members before I move on? Okay.
Amy.
Oh, yes, Sally.
I know I've been asked this question a lot in the past, and I wonder if you could just weigh in on it and just talk about the importance of the specificity and including the description of key staff members, and also the risk that some of those key staff members might no longer be with the organization or serving in those roles by the time the grant is awarded or is implemented. So can you talk about the balance of that?
Yes. Again, what the key staff members that you do have there, it's a really good question. And based on reviews I do, this is usually what I push forward and tends to work pretty well. At least with most reviewers, is that you really want to highlight their experience, and talk about their education if that's relevant. Talk about obviously their experience. Maybe they've had past experience at other workplaces. Any of this that's going to make them look like they really can do this job is great. When we get into additional resources, lately, and that kind of is a lead into my next slide. If you are going to get additional resources, we know that everybody is going to have a request for proposal or qualifications for a qualified environmental professional. And you may need another one. You may need someone that can provide community support, community outreach. Make sure that you always mention the CFR Part 200 and Part 1500 that you're going, or 500, I'm sorry, that you're going to follow. What I like to say also, in addition to this, is that if you do have others on staff that do have those capabilities, and for example, Sally, she has a wealth of knowledge. If she was actually going for a grant and working in a nonprofit or other capacity, she might be actually the executive director, and you've got a brownfield manager under her. If the brownfield manager were to leave, Sally could step in the meantime, because she can do everything. Do two jobs, but we all end up doing that from time to time. But if there's somebody that can step in the meantime while you're hiring, mention that. It just goes further to say, hey, we're thinking about this. We're thinking about if somebody would move on, because that's always a possibility. I just really encourage you to do that and mention that in your actual grant narrative. One thing I do want to point out, and this is in previous grant application language, is this note. If you have already selected a contractor or a subrecipient without complying with the CFR, the response will be evaluated less favorably. This is in section 6, where they do the reviewers look to making sure that you cover these things and get the points. So you want to make sure, if this is pre-planning, if you haven't done that type of activity, that you actually are, that you actually kind of make sure that everybody is CFR compliant, or realize that if you are going to say this is your contractor, you're going to get less points. It's better just to say that you're going to put out an RFP. And this gets to another issue that came up in a different webinar last week, and that is a lot of consultants do help communities and nonprofits and other organizations with grants, and helping them write them and put them together. One of the things EPA wants you to, and it's not necessarily in the grant itself, but wants you to be aware of and document, is you want to make sure that at least a nominal fee is paid to that consultant so that it is, everything is above board. It doesn't look like you're favoring that consultant before an RFP even goes out. So that's something you want to be aware of. If you have questions about that, I would probably recommend that you talk to John Jervis, people at EPA that have dealt with this issue more than I, but I do want to point that out at this point in time. So here I've got some example language from a successful grant. And just the highlighted, they do talk about the county having organizational capacity, to run a project through their administration department. So they have a whole department that has a lot of grant management experience, and they are set up to be capable for managing a grant. Now, this isn't necessarily getting into the actual people like your brownfield manager that would be doing the day-to-day things, but it's saying, look, we already are set up to manage grants and manage them effectively. So here's a pretty good example of a description of key staff. Talk about the project, the environmental project manager, and who will manage the administration, scheduling, and procurement. So the brownfield manager. Kim Steigerwald, who we saw or spoke with yesterday and saw on this webinar, is the Director of Acquisition and Disposition in her role, and brings more than 33 years of community development experience, including management prior US EPA grants. So we're talking about somebody that's the executive director, like in my example, talking about Sally, so that if Carly was to move on to another job, or, something happens and she can't perform that work, for a period of time, Kim could move in that position until they hire a brownfield manager. The other thing I want to point out that sometimes is left out, make sure, and you can mention other key people if there are more than just 3. Generally, you're going to have an executive director or a director. You're going to have a brownfield manager. But also make sure you don't leave out who's going to handle your financials. So Mel Sanders, who is a CPA and a chief financial officer with experience, is going to be the grants manager. So talking about good experience, good qualifications, they can do this work. So with acquiring additional resource, they may have other real estate experts. As I mentioned, there may be people in addition to your qualified environmental professional to help with the reuse planning, or maybe they're going to hire a planner, to help with some planning and market studies and things like that. In the event, they talk about meeting the 2 CFR 200 and 1500, and in the event of leadership changes due to staff turnover, as Sally was asking, they will fill positions who have strong project management skills. So they are addressing that. I would like to see them also say, well, Kim Steigerwald can handle this. She has the expertise and the background to do that. But do mention more than just meeting the 2 CFR provisions. Past performance and compliance with grant requirements. Before I move on to this, do any of our panel members have anything they want to add? Okay. And this is the part of your resume where you talk about what you've done in the past. I worked here, I did this. or I've had, I managed these projects successfully, all those sorts of things. So think of it as your experience as an organization part of the resume. So you're going to be talking about your accomplishments, and with respect to either a brownfield grant or a federal or non-federal grant. Your outputs and outcomes should be entered into acres. So do mention that as part of how you've performed with this grant. And you can't, if you feel free to, if you've got an ongoing grant, to mention that and what you've accomplished so far and how you've stayed on schedule. So those things are important to mention, what the grant was for, what you accomplished if it's a closed grant, and that you stayed on schedule if it's an ongoing grant, the same two things, and that you are maintaining schedule and through regular meetings with your QEP or something of that nature. And then compliance, how you complied with the work plans, with the schedules, the terms and conditions, and timely reporting, and meeting your grant timeline. Very, very important. Here's an example. Sorry for the, hopefully you can read this later when you download these. I mainly put this up for a successful grantee who had US EPA grant experience, just to say, when you have a lot of grants, and typically I know in past NOFOs, past grant guidelines, they don't want you to mention more than 3 grants. They'll usually tell you exactly. It's typically 3 or less. So this obviously successful grantee had 3 ongoing, well, 1 ongoing and 2 completed grants from US EPA. So I love the table thing. When you have a lot of grants, this is a really good way for a reviewer to just quickly take a look at what the grant was, what the project outputs were, and what the outcomes were. So, real easy way to get to that. Same thing with the compliance, the grant and how you complied with the grant requirements, and how you met your reporting goals, how you met your 4-year or 5-year timeline, depending on the grant, those sorts of things.
Amy,
Yes.
let's say you've never gone for the US EPA grant, but you've worked a lot with the state of Ohio and their program.
Yes, I am so glad you asked that question.
Can you list those?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that you just led me, well, actually, this is for has not received an EPA grant, and how they talked about it, or non-federal assistance, but has received federal or non-federal assistance like the state of Ohio. So I thought this one was interesting. It's a little different. This was from a successful Illinois grant. They received a $175,000 grant, which is close to some of our assessment grants and cleanup grants and things like that. So it's it doesn't have to be a giant amount, $2 million or whatever, but something in the neighborhood, that looks at a grant that probably is a significant amount of money and does have some requirements, obviously specific requirements tied to it. This came from the Illinois Department of Commerce. Likewise, with Ohio EPA, you can talk about grants that maybe you've received from the Department of Development, Jobs Ohio, some of the TBA work that's been done, even though that's not, I still think that's maybe good to add on if you don't really have brownfield experience, and don't have a lot of federal grant experience. Anything you can put in there is good. Some of the examples I'll mention, if you haven't had any real particularly EPA experience, is you can look at things like CBDG grants. I think Beth talked a little bit about those and how they can be used. HUD grants, infrastructure grants. There was a lot of infrastructure grant money, in the last administration awarded for, fixing up streets, putting in curbs, putting in sidewalks, all those sorts of things. Those are all relevant because they all have to do, even though if it's not directly with brownfields, it's to do with revitalization. So any of these sorts of things that get to, the world of brownfields, which includes this revitalization and infrastructure improvement and making your city, town, county, village, better for its residents, more walkable, safer, that sort of thing, is something you should mention. Don't say you didn't receive a grant unless you really have no idea of what you could mention. And even then, talk to EPA, talk to TAB, talk to Ohio EPA. We'll help you find it because you don't want to get, docked for points here. Always show that you do have some level of experience managing a grant that is similar in scope, somewhat similar in amount, that sort of thing, so that people know that you have kind of worked in that area and how you've complied with that. So again, this is your experience. Like I said, even if you're coming out straight out of college, I've seen wonderful applications that I've reviewed, kind of like this, that of people coming straight out of college, but work they did while they were in college during the summers or maybe directly after was wonderfully relevant. So, you always have something to make yourself shine. So don't, if you can't think anything, give us a call. We'll help you. So now we're at the end of our narrative. And as we mentioned before, you're not alone. You have KSU TAB for those of you who are in our regions, other TAB providers in other regions. Here for Ohio folks, we have Ohio EPA with a wealth of knowledge, and also US EPA when you can talk to them. And talking to them early on here before even the guidelines are out for FY27 is a good thing. KSU TAB can help. I live a lot of the year in Arizona, and we do see this with forest fires. So when things are really bad or you're feeling really bad, we can help. We'll come to the rescue. So we will review your EPA, as mentioned before by both Roxanne and Beth, grant prior to submittal to EPA, prior to the due date. It always helps to have a second set of eyes. I'm quite sure you're going to have somebody else, if you're the grant writer in your department or whatever, take a look at it. But if you are close to the project, it's helpful to have somebody that, like folks at KSU TAB that don't know your grant, maybe know a little bit about you, but, really are more of in a reviewer type position. Take a look at this and say, hey, you should really beef this up a little bit, or don't mention this instead. So just take advantage of it. It's free. Do get your proposal drafts in early if you can. 2 weeks before the due date is really helpful. We have a number of reviewers, but obviously the quicker you get it in, the earlier you get it in, the better a chance of having it give a very thorough review.
Amy?
Yes.
Could I just interject a couple of things to underscore what you're saying about the helpfulness of the KSU TAB staff? I mean, for one, to go back to what Beth said earlier about the TAB Easy tool, I have found that to be incredibly helpful because it helps you see any blind spots that you might have and really track with that year's application guidelines. And then also the reviews that the staff at KSU TAB provide are incredibly helpful and detailed. And then the other thing I would add is the KSU TAB staff have been very wise in their advice about, contemplating to a community. And so, in fact, it was in this past year who was taking a really deep dive, helping to understand with us what the competitive landscape would look like and where our client would be better off applying, which bucket of funds to pursue. So I just wanted to put that out there. And you put that wildfire slide up there again. For all of us here in Ohio, we are seeing the impacts of fire.
Yeah.
830
I am in Ohio right
wildfire.
now, so
Yeah.
I was looking at the weather report tomorrow, for tomorrow, Friday at 7 a.m. and it's going to be nasty, for all of Ohio.
Yeah,
It's not as bad for Columbus right now, but yeah.
it is.
So
It's pretty crazy here. 830 plus Canadian fires burning right now is what I read this morning.
yeah. Oh my gosh. It's
Anyways,
crazy.
not to detract from my comments about the helpfulness of the KSU tab staff and the tools that they've created. I cannot emphasize enough how important of resources those are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
Can
go ahead, Vince.
I double Sally's comments about reviewers? The amount of space available on these applications for us to write, for us to add bar charts and graphs and whatnot, it is small by design, right? They don't want to read it. The reviewers don't want to read 100 pages, but not all of us are trained to be concise in our writing, to be professional editors, those kind of things. So even though we may be really good at what we do and really knowledgeable about local conditions, just to have somebody review your product early, especially early in the process, to help tweak and help you cut down on things that, just pulling things out that might not be as relevant.
Right. Let us help you. That's what we're here for. And I agree, Vince, when you have a small amount of plate space, that's easy to, especially things that you're really proud of that have been accomplished, or that, you have as far as community outreach capacity to, being able to track grants really well, that sort of thing. It's easy to repeat those things. And those are things we can catch, because I know those are things I would do if I was writing a grant. So we do look for things that, I know this would be easy, for me to do, and not think about it. So we kind of keep an equal eye out for those sorts of things.
Amy.
And we just have a great group of reviewers. Yes, thanks, Crystal.
Yeah, and you just hit something about that ties into what I was thinking about with when Beth said earlier, be excited about your project. And when we're all doing this work, we get in a rut. We say the same things, the same stories all the time. And throughout the 2 days, it has really hit me how much the grant influences and reflects real life. And by that, the words we're using, as an example, I was walking down through a downtown with some high school kids, and they were telling me all the things that used to be there and all the things that they've lost, the stories that they've heard. And those things were all gone before these kids were born. But they're in that rut. They just repeat what their parents have told them. And I said, okay, well, let's change that. Let's look at this as this is our chance to reinvent ourselves. And the young man actually stood up taller when I used those words. And if you think about that kind of wording in a grant application, and it goes back to be excited about your project and we have to be cognizant of our own ruts that we get into with our stories.
Yeah. And that's easy enough for us to tease out and say, hey, don't mention this time. Do you have another example or whatever? Because you probably do. Like Beth said, when you get excited about your projects, that's an awesome thing. It will help your grant. Also having that champion, Beth's always talked about that. Roxanne brought it up again today. Yeah, I can't, like folks like Crystal, you have to have that champion out there. And then let us as TAB, help you make sure that everything fits in a nice, neat box, easy to review, and just looks fantastic. So uh, definitely use our services. So here's, I think you may have it from previous presentations, but here is my information, Roxanne's, you have Beth's. Please talk to us if you, have any questions, want to look at anything early on. And of course, the wonderful Dan and the wonderful Ohio EPA staff. And I will off right now and let Roxanne call for the break, I think is next, but I have a bunch of barking dogs, so I'm going to.
Thank you, Amy. I'm just gonna throw out another reminder for the feedback on today's event. If you guys have to hop off early or something else, please just make sure to fill out the survey to help provide us with some feedback. And so with that, we are gonna hop off for a break. Welcome back. Hopefully everybody is getting situated, has a drink, ready to dive back in. We are going to start back with Amy Yursevich again, and she's going to be doing a small presentation of tying it all together to kind of wrap this all together for us before we go into the group exercise. So with that, Amy, if your dogs aren't barking anymore, take it away.
Thank you. And my dogs aren't barking anymore. They were actually, it was my son's corgi who we are watching, and corgis bark at everything, but it was
They
the
do.
evil mail. It was the evil mailman.
Oh,
So
that mailman.
yeah, so I think we're done for the day, but I can't guarantee anything. So if there is barking, please excuse me.
You're fine.
Excuse my corgi. Anyway, so I am going to talk about tying it to how to tie everything together and have a good and a successful grant proposal. And tying it all together is a key thing here. We want to make sure, and you don't see it as much anymore. I think most of the people who are writing grants are getting knowledgeable and talking to TAB or talking to others, talking to their state to see what makes a good proposal. But really tying it all together and making sure you don't have portions that you talk about in a different section that have nothing to do with what you discuss in section one when you kind of lay out your whole story and why you need this help is very important. And that sorry. These are a little touchy. And if our panelists, Crystal and Vince and Sally are here, I invite you to pop in at any point to talk about your experiences, because this is a good one to hear about it as well. With putting together, tips and tricks and things to avoid. Any help is good help. So basically what you're doing, and this is mostly in section one, is setting the stage. You're talking about, you're telling a story. You're getting excited, like Crystal talked about, Beth talked about, what you're excited about. You as the champion, or you're working with the champion for your community, and what's going on there. You probably had, if you are in Region 5 and in Ohio as well, as part of it, a lot of our cities have an industrial past, which made them the big and great cities that had all kinds of good amenities, that they turned into. But in the 70s and the 80s, there was a big downturn for that. So telling that story specifically with respect to your community, your geographic area, is important. And within that, you want to talk about your target area or target areas and your affected population. And make sure that these what you select, which you should be thinking about now or ahead of time before the grant comes out, that target area and that affected population reflect back on the history and the challenges. This particular target area was one of our industrial corridors for steel making, and we lost, 3,000 jobs in this year, these years, and this target area is really depressed, high poverty, housing is not in good shape. The pollution, legacy pollution has caused, problems with people's health, that sort of thing. So you want to make sure that, what you pull out of this is and decide on is a microcosm of those major history and challenges you face. Then you want to talk about how you're going to fix it. And assessment, you may be cleaning up a site or sites. You may have other activities such as inventory or planning. You may be doing some remedial planning as well. So those sorts of things that are going to help fix what is affecting this target area and also the affected population. And then you want to talk about the positive impacts. Oftentimes you're going to hopefully improve the health you anticipate improving the health of the neighborhood by not just getting rid of some of these pollutants, cleaning them up, but also maybe there are situations where you're improving walkability or, some also along with whatever else you're looking at, revitalizing, you're adding parks and things like that that will help with the physical health of those affected populations. And basically this leads to more people wanting to be around there. It's less blight, more development, not just with the sites that you're focusing on, but others. So that setting that stage is really important, and then following through with all the other sections in the application are important. So here's just a simple renewal example. Lack of business opportunities, job lost, failed industrial legacy, which is very common, obviously, for those of us in Ohio and other Region 5 states and elsewhere. And you have health and environmental impacts. The economy's poor, oftentimes when failed industry, then those businesses that have supported the failed industry, leave as well, and high unemployment and contamination result. What you've picked is an abandoned manufacturing site. Totally relatable because you do have a failed industrial legacy, and what you want to do is clean it up and turn it into a business incubator. So you're creating jobs, you're taking care of some of the pollution, contamination in the area, and also indeed improving the health and welfare of the residents. So here are some of the common pitfalls. You've probably heard some of these over the last 2 days, and I'll just repeat some, but I might have a few new ones in here. Don't wait till the guidelines come out. There's still it's going to be FY27 for the notice of funding opportunity, or what they call the NOFO now. But we have FY26. You can pull those out if you don't have them off the ASU tab website. US EPA also has those. Take a look at them if you haven't. If you haven't read them for a while, reread them. Get ready. I mentioned this yesterday. Don't select. You can definitely have more than one target area, and for a coalition you need to, but don't select too many. You don't want to get bogged down in having to write and respond to a number of things under particularly section 2 that talks target areas a lot and kind of lose your train of thought or maybe leave one out, keep it to a manageable number. In the same way that think about it if you're managing the grant. If you're successful, that's going to be hard if you've got way too many target areas to focus on and make sure that you're getting done what needs to be done. Too many brownfields for the same reason, there, as we mentioned yesterday, EPA asks for what your process is going to be for selecting additional sites. So if you do have an additional money, there's that's something EPA anticipates could happen, and so you don't have to put every single site, put the really important ones down. Focusing on a priority brownfield where the assessment or cleanup doesn't address the impacted population and health statistics. Anything that just doesn't fit in with what your story is being told is just, you don't want to do that. You want to make sure that it just closely aligns. And also, in addition to that, making sure if it closely aligns, it's going to be closely aligning with your community's planning and land use plans. Writing too much up front and not saying enough for other areas. And that's, again, I mentioned that earlier, that's something we do look out for when we're reviewing, because that's just something that can easily happen. You get excited about your project and you want to make sure every single detail is included. So just be aware of that. And again, take advantage of our reviews. Ignoring the notes in section 6, which is the notes that are to reviewers, what they're looking at when they're scoring. So something like an inability to draw on another initial sources of funding is not because the community has a small population or low income. You want to mention that one or the other is in there. And if you don't, you're going to only get 2 of 5 points. That's huge. These are very competitive. Every point counts. Can make a difference on whether you get the grant or not. And you don't want to lose something that is. So make sure you're looking at all those notes. Look carefully, not only at the narrative criteria, but also at what the reviewer criteria for scoring under section 6. And your non-cohesive story kind of gets back to what I was talking about before. You started out talking about your city's story and how things failed with industry leaving or whatever. And then you start talking about something totally different, addressing, later on in the application. And that may seem like that couldn't happen, but it does. I've seen it a lot. So just be really careful that your story is cohesive. And incomplete, and we've talked about this, response to criteria. You don't want to not respond, and make sure that you read those criteria very, very carefully and get our review, because we can also pick that out too. Do your homework. That talked a lot about some wonderful grant resources, including this grant research links guidance document. I kind of started that way back when, and then Beth and Kristen did a wonderful job, because some of the things have changed over the last few years as far as the actual good links that you really want to follow that are going to help with your application. So do download that, use it. And then Beth did some great examples. So hopefully you listened in really good. And this is just a few other things that I pulled out, and these were just, I probably did this, as I was putting this together. So I'm sure there's different sources, data resources that are out there. We've got Department of Health, we've got crime in Ohio counties, and the Ohio Incident-Based Reporting System. There are various other cities that have public health data. Not all of them have it, but if they do search for it if you're in a larger city or even a medium-sized city, because A lot of the Ohio Department of Health data is by county. And if you're writing a grant for a city or like a nearby suburb of a city, then, they may actually have their own database. Local resources. This is something that you want to check with your if you're a small village, maybe you have a big city nearby, but if you're in a big city city or even a county, you might want to check in with them about transportation and planning departments that they have. They may have inventories of things like sidewalk existence and condition, ADA compliance. That can be a big issue. If that is not, you don't have the money and it hasn't been done. Parks and Rec. Oftentimes, your Parks and Rec, whether it's a county or a local park department, will have an inventory that identifies which neighborhoods are underserved by parks, and local hospital reports. So if you're in a small area and you really can't get much data other than what's in the county Ohio Department database of health, for the county, local hospitals do a lot of reporting and researching because they need to know what to expect as far as hospital admissions, ER admissions, problems, health problems, that sort of thing. So this is something that they do for their own business plan. So they may share that with you as well. And we have our grant writing assistants. And in that, Tabby Z, Beth did a wonderful job explaining that. And so I won't spend any time on that. But also within that area, we have of our KSU tab webpage, we have past successful applications. And as we've mentioned many, many times, we do review of draft grant applications. In addition to assistance directly related, KSU tab can also provide, so in addition to our reviews and tab EZ and helping you out with that, there are things that we can do. And these are the things, if you think you need it, do it right now, because September is just around the corner, September, October, when we expect the new NOFO to be out. Strategic planning, redevelopment visioning, education, community outreach, and help with identifying and prioritizing brownfield sites. So we are able to help you with that. Like I said, get in early, get this done. Draft application review, I don't really need to, other than to say it's usually a 3 to 5 day turnaround, sorry. So if you can and get it in early, and it's free. So if you're just starting out or you haven't identified where you want to be, this is kind of all new to you or fairly new. Here are the things that you want to think about. If you are, listening in today and yesterday, and it's like, yeah, I definitely want my community to go for a EPA Brownfield Mark grant. Make sure that you have the AOR for grants.gov. If you don't, and you're not on grants.gov and you don't have the UEI, I talked about that yesterday. Make sure you get that earlier the better, just to keep any slip ups from happening. Along with that, get familiar with grants.gov. Any questions you have, make sure you use the hotline. They have some really, really, really well versed people on there that can help you out. As I mentioned, the UEI identifier, and make sure that is all accurate. Your SAM information is accurate. Identify, engage potential partners, and read FY26 guidelines on and review past applications. And also, if you, as I mentioned in the previous slide, if you identify that you need any help with outreach or visioning, that sort of thing, get a hold of TAP. If you just got a site or two, or maybe you're thinking next year I would like to, be in a position to have a cleanup grant for these sites or this site. This is when you want to think about state or federal TBA. Start with the state, with Dan and Company. Here's the application for the state TBAs. Information on, for Dan and others is also on there. And, apply for those. As Richard mentioned this morning, you gave a really good detail on what's available there. Sometimes if it's a bigger project, this is why I would encourage you. And when I worked at the EPA, I did the same thing. Get with us first, because for the bigger projects, you may want to pull in a federal EPA, and these are the contacts. And we can kind of help you get acquainted with them. And we have done that on some projects, or at least when I worked for Ohio EPA. But, start with the Ohio EPA and Dan and Richard and all those first. Assessment grant. Okay, what you need to start getting done early at the coalition. Make sure you know who you want in your coalition. And I think Shelby mentioned last time, make sure that yesterday that you don't have coalition members that are, that there's two people in your city that are trying to do a coalition grant, or two people in your county, or two entities, nonprofit entities in a city. Be in touch with people, who they are, who the nonprofits are, who the regional development districts are, and things like that. So get that coalition together, get an MOA together that kind of outlines everybody's duties, so everybody knows what the expectations and what their duties are. And then start identifying your priority brownfield sites for coalition at one, as we've mentioned before, it has to be one in each coalition's district. So you have to have at least one in each of their jurisdictions or districts. As we mentioned before, access. Work on securing access. Don't get things moving until and really, hooked on a particular priority site unless you can definitely get access. Establish a reuse plan or end use for the sites. This is something else that TAB can provide some insight on and assistance. Engage the public. And so community outreach, as Roxanne mentioned yesterday, it's a two-way street. You're going to get a lot of good input. So do that early, because that's going to help you a lot, give you good ideas, not only give you good ideas, but keep you from moving forward toward priorities or target areas that the public's not going to support. Cleanup grant, applicant eligibility, site eligibility. If you know your site and you've got any questions, first talk to Ohio EPA, and you may want to also talk to US EPA before the guidelines are out. Make sure that you're clear on that for your site or sites. We've talked about the phase 2. Has to be completed, has to be, a full phase 2. And you do have to have an actual reuse plan with secured funding. That's a big deal, that you're going to lose big points if your funding isn't secured, and particularly if you don't even have a really good, solid reuse plan that's going to work for your target area and what your needs are. And then start drafting the APCA. And here's a APCA example to give you an idea that you can download. And for revolving loan grant funding, we do help with these reviews. They're kind of specialized. Like we've had RLFs through our Department of Development in Ohio, and a lot of regional funding agencies will have them. So people that are used to doing loans and things like that and have that infrastructure to manage that. So they need to make sure they're eligible and then start marketing or developing a good marketing plan. And that is it. Sorry, I probably whipped through that kind of quick, but if any of our panelists want to add anything, please do. And um, thank you. Okay, well, I'm gonna,
Amy.
yeah,
All right.
passing it on.
Yeah, no, thank you. We're moving on to our interactive section that we now get to put everything into practice that we just covered. So if you were here yesterday, you had the opportunity to evaluate the project area description and community needs sections of a successful application. Today, we're going to do the same thing, but this time we're going to focus on section 3, which is task descriptions, cost estimates, and measuring progress. So, let me move my slide, sorry. This section is where applicants demonstrate that they have a realistic, well thought out plan for carrying out the project. It's one thing to convince EPA that your community has a need. It's another to convince them that you're ready to successfully manage that grant. So as you review today's application, think like both a reviewer and a project manager. So ask yourself whether the applicant is clearly explaining what they're doing and what they're going to do and when they're going to do it, how much it's going to cost, and how they'll know if it's making progress. Again, if there isn't like one perfect answer when you're reading, we're not looking for everyone to arrive at the same score. The value of this exercise comes from the discussion, hearing different perspectives, comparing interpretations of criteria, and then understanding why reviewers may score the same application very differently, which we saw yesterday. Just like yesterday, you'll be working in your assigned breakout groups with one of our facilitators. This time, every group is going to be reviewing the same section of the narrative ranking criteria, which is section 3. You'll have about an hour to work through the section together. It looks like it might actually be closer to 50 minutes based on our timing. We recommend spending the first few minutes reviewing the application individually, compare what the applicant wrote against the review criteria, make notes about strengths and weaknesses, and identify any places where you think additional details might be strengthened by a response that's different. Then, as a group, you're going to discuss your observations and work toward a consensus score. Before returning to the main room, you should probably select someone from your group to provide a brief report out of your discussion, and preferably someone other than your facilitator, but we understand if that's not the case. As you review this section, you want to keep asking yourselves these main things. Does the work plan feel realistic? Are the tasks organized in a logical sequence as we went through? Do the cost estimates seem reasonable and well supported? And could this project actually be implemented as written? So remember, this section is all about giving the EPA confidence that the applicant can successfully deliver this project through to completion. Next. Just as you did yesterday, you'll have 3 primary resources available during your exercise. Your primary resource tool is the narrative review information, section 6B. This is a document you'll use to score the application and evaluate how well the applicant addressed each criterion. Most of you should have received this on Tuesday before we started via an email, but you can also access it now via the link to our resources, which I believe Hannah can put in the chat for you again if you haven't already accessed it. Your second resource is section 4C of the EPA grant guidelines. If you need clarification on exactly what the EPA is asking under particular criterion, this is where you find the complete narrative instructions. It just kind of says it in a different way and beefs it out a little bit. Finally, you'll be reviewing FY26 multipurpose grant application from Youngstown Neighborhood Development Corporation, same application as yesterday. So I recommend, if it's possible on your screen, to kind of keep all of these documents open throughout the exercise and as you're having a conversation. So in short, 6B tells you how EPA will score the application. 4C tells you what EPA asks the applicant to provide, and the Youngstown application lets you evaluate whether the applicant actually did it. So this section's a little different from the first two. I'd encourage you to focus on a few specific things as you review. First, the proposed tasks. Are the proposed tasks actually eligible, logical, and detailed enough for you to understand what the applicant intends to accomplish? And then next, look at the scheduling. Does the sequence of activities make sense? Are milestones realistic? Does the applicant clearly identify activities that will continue through the grant period, such as reporting, financial management, and community engagement. So it's a little bit different in that it's not as interpretive. It's very much, does it fit the guideline or does it not? You'll want to pay close attention to the budget narrative as well. Did the applicant explain how the cost estimates were developed, or did they simply just provide numbers? Are unit costs clearly identified? Do the budget categories appear appropriate? Then you'll want to consider how the applicant plans to measure success. Have they clearly distinguished between their outputs, things they'll produce during the grant, and their outcomes, the longer term results they expect to achieve? Do they explain how they'll monitor that process, report accomplishments, address delays if the project falls behind schedule? So as you look through how all these pieces work together, ultimately you're seeing, do the tasks support the goals identified earlier in the application? So by the time you're finished reading this section, you should have confidence that the applicant is not only a worthwhile project, but also has a realistic plan to successfully implement it. So with that, I will let Hannah push us into our breakout rooms and enjoy the discussion. Don't feel afraid to challenge each other while you're scoring, and we'll see you in about 50 minutes. I hope all of your conversations went as well as ours did. We had much fewer breakout groups this time, so not as many to report out. But do I have any volunteers that would like to start?
Well, I'll go ahead and start.
Thank you.
We have Ursula, Corinne or Corin? Corinne,
It's
Robert.
Corin. Yep.
Sorry about that. And a great group. And Ursula will be our she's going to report out. And
Thank you.
I'm glad to see you back. Great.
So we scheduled section 3A. We gave them a 10. It was very detailed. They really sounded like they knew exactly what they were going to do. They knew how they were going to do it. They had an idea of how it was going to work, how it was going to turn out. It just sounded very confident. So we all gave them a 10 on section 3A. Section B, we gave them a 4. It was clear, but also very kind of a lot of acronyms and a little confusing to follow. And I think it could have been made more readable, and that was the primary reason. There were a little bit of inconsistencies, but it may have just also been as a result of it being pretty technical and a lot of acronyms, and it was just a little hard to follow. So we gave it a 4. Section C and D both got a 5. Section E, we gave a 15. I think the budget was very reasonable and the budget breakdown was very good and very thorough. And I have done many of those and I know what a pain they are to make, especially to make a really good one. Somebody probably spent like 2 days working on that, at least. They have every lot that all the money is going to go to already all planned out, and exactly when the money's where the money's going and everything, and it's very organized and very thorough, and it makes me feel that they're very confident about this project, and that makes me feel confident in their project. So that got a 15 across the board. And 3F, we gave it a 4 because they did not include the results. It says in the little prompt to include, I don't have it pulled up in front of me, but the last thing is results, and there were no results included. So it probably was stated elsewhere in the grant, and they didn't want to be redundant, but also if it says it in the prompt, it should be included in the response. So they got a point off for that, for a total of 43 out of a possible 45 points.
Yeah, it was the outcomes that they
Yeah.
missed out on. They
Mhm.
didn't talk about how they're going to track those outcomes.
Thank you. We also disagreed with the outcomes part, but I'm curious to see if everybody had a similar take on that. Do we have another volunteer from another group?
Yeah, I can go. We did ours. 3A, we gave it a 10. Thought they hit all the requirements, made it flow very well. 3B, we gave it a 3. Schedule was not real clear. It kind of was hard to find. Maybe should be put in a chart that's kind of standalone, maybe not grouped in with the inputs and outcomes section. 3C, we gave it a 4. Had a lot of good detail in that. A little hard to follow the flow with it. It was just a little bit on the harder side to kind of follow that, but what wasn't terrible, but the leads were kind of hard to follow. 3D, we gave it a 3. Schedule included was confusing. Output should have been clear. Less reports. You know, move the outcomes. 3E, we gave it a 13. Again, thought that the budget was really clear, was broken down very well. The task breakdown. The task breakdowns didn't necessarily match the wording that was used in the chart for the budget. So again, kind of hard to follow. You kind of had to interpret what they were doing instead of it being very clear. Did like that they had the percentages on there. So again, very easy to follow. 3F, we gave that a 2. Felt like they needed more detail. The outcomes were general. Thought they probably needed to be a little clearer with the outcomes, and how they were going to measure those outcomes and what those outcomes were actually going to be. So overall, we gave it a 35 out of 45.
Yeah, we were a little we were a little harsher, I think, on ours. Do we have another group?
I think we can go next. This is Amy. And Heather's going to give us our breakdown and thoughts.
So for letter A, we gave them an 8 out of 10. We just kind of felt there's a couple inconsistencies. And then also there was a mention of 3 of the 7 sites, but there was no mention, at least in that section, of the other 4 sites that we noticed. So just kind of missing that information. We did go ahead and give them 5s for B through D. We just felt that the information was there and the prompts were there. For letter E, on the cost estimates, we gave them a 12 out of 15. The construction line item was lost, and that we just kind of felt like there could be more backup for the numbers, and particularly with the estimates and cleanup. And then for F, we also decided to give them a 5 with all the information. And then if there's anything I missed, Amy.
I don't think so. I think you covered everything. We felt the cost estimates just did not have enough backup, particularly for, because it's hard to estimate cleanup costs. And obviously they got information from a contractor, but you need to include that information. So we weren't as harsh as the last group, but we did have issues.
Well, and Amy, at least that Heather heavily emphasized that the construction line item was missing, and that, again, as Roxanne discussed, that don't change the budget table. It's there for a purpose. It had a lot of instruction about why it should be there, and because of the remedial costs being more than 50%, again, it just should have been documented in a better way than just maybe a sentence.
Thanks, Heather, for doing, we kind of put you on the spot last minute, but anyway, you did a great job.
Thank you.
And I will stop sharing.
So what were some of your guys' overall takeaways? Is there anything that somebody noticed or would rethink based on how somebody else scored the group? Um, or something somebody didn't notice? I really liked what Shelby pointed out.
I think one of probably the biggest takeaway was that the story was told and um, you could really get a sense of that throughout their entire application rather than it kind of being broken up or very choppy. Um, but again, aside from all the inconsistencies, I think that kind of highlights through just our reviews that it can range depending upon who's reading this. So, and the details that get caught.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Which is why it's good to have as many eyes on your application before you submit it as possible. All right. So for those of you who are still here, if you could please try and make sure to fill out our survey. It doesn't take very long. There's not very many questions, but we could definitely use your feedback both on the workshop side and the webinar side as far as the content that we covered, how we covered it, the structure of the workshop, anything that you can provide feedback on to make this better for next year. And so we can continue to provide educational aspects of these types of things that are helpful for the people who are actually using them. Here's some contact info. This is going to be available, so you don't have to copy anything down, but this is the speakers from today and the main contacts for both KSU Tab and Ohio EPA if you need to contact them. If you would like to be a part of our mailing list for KSU Tab, please scan the barcode and you can join there or just on ksutab.org. And with that, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. We had some really great discussions. I think this went really well. All the resources, the recording, and the actual PowerPoint will be available online, which is in the chat. And if you have any residual questions, you may ask them now. Otherwise, have an excellent afternoon.